The U.S. is still a democracy, and Venezuela, unfortunately, is a country with a very consolidated authoritarian government. But Venezuela was once a democracy, and I believe the U.S. is experiencing democratic backsliding, and Venezuelans saw how democracy gradually was lost. And I have to say I see signs in the US that remind me of things I saw in Venezuela before. For example, in many countries that have lost democracy, populist leaders tend to present politics in a us versus them way, correct? Us is them and their group, and the other is an enemy. And this is incredibly damaging for societies because in politics and in democracy, people disagree. And disagreeing, dissenting is a very normal part of the democratic debate. But when politicians, especially the highest authority in government, present those who dissent, who question, and who criticize power as the enemies, you start breaking the very social fabric of democracy. So the us versus them narrative is something that I saw in Venezuela and that I see happening in the US. I think many populist leaders, and I saw that in Venezuela as well, and I see a bit of that in the US, also know how to appropriate grievances. Democracies are imperfect, and it does happen that many democracies do not deliver. So you have societies that feel unsatisfied, and they look for leaders who promise quick fixes and fast changes. And populist leaders manipulate these unsatisfied needs, so they become the champions of the solutions that do not come, but that they promise the people. So they pretend to be the only ones that can bring the solutions, and they discredit any other potential solutions to social problems, and becoming the idea that they are the only problem solvers become also a very important part of the narrative. And one thing that and this is what worries me the most about what I'm seeing in the US is the disdain from the disdain for institutions, for the basic institutions of democracy, the check and balances, of course, but also key institutions of any democracy like free press, civil society, etc. There is first a disdain that is expressed in narrative when you start insulting judges that disagree with you, insulting journalists that publish things against your government or against officials, calling them enemies of the people or other names. But then when you actually pass policies or implement policies that reduce, the power of or literally or threaten judicial independence or co-opt the judicial branch, for example. So I think when you start seeing instances in which the system of check and balances is compromised, then you really see that the executive branch is able to take, over other branches of government. And once that power goes unchecked, democracy is really under threat. And we saw that in Venezuela, and from then onwards, accumulation of power in the hands of one person is what really then brings many other elements of an authoritarian government in place. And I do have to say that preserving democracy is incredibly important for a society, because once democracy is lost, transitioning back to democracy is really, really difficult. I strongly believe in the power of the vote, and political participation is one of the most important tools citizens have to confront power. And that's why authoritarian leaders always go after electoral systems, because that is a way of controlling who participates or who wins or who holds power. So making sure that you vote whenever you have the chance to vote, but you also participate, in every state, in every level of decision making you can, is always, I think, is always a way to be part of the political fabric of the country. From the school board, to be a congressperson. And I think that I'm encouraged when I see that young people, people from different backgrounds are now out there, being part of or being more engaged, are getting more engaged into politics. I think that, of course, even the traditional ways of protesting is incredibly valid. I mean, I have seen people protesting in the streets, people every weekend, putting signs in different places. That, the more you express yourself, the more healthy and vibrant a democracy is. Institutions exist to be used. You have to make use of the institutions you have, otherwise they become irrelevant. So I think Americans need to make sure that those institutions you have need to be used. Use the courts, use the political institutions, use the schools, use all the institutions you have. And if you don't think those institutions are enough, if you don't think those institutions are good to your purposes, then reform them. But don't stop using them because you don't feel they are what you need. And I also think that it's important to build community. This can be a very difficult moment especially for vulnerable groups. And I see fear in groups that feel persecuted or whose rights are being very threatened. I think building community with those groups is very needed. And societies can always use their imagination, to think differently. And I have seen the history shows that when people come together, they can be much more creative than those in power. And I have seen some of the most amazing political campaigns from newcomers in politics, or from groups that are not usually the traditional or politicians, or not necessarily in traditional politics, but in other aspects of society, becoming relevant social forces. And I think that using your imagination, to be an important part of society, to confront raw power, is it's a great way of keeping democracy alive in your own way.